The Pacific was about to ignite. As Europe burned in World War II, Japan turned its sights on Asia, hungry for resources and power. Economic sanctions by the U.S. only hardened Tokyo's resolve. In 1940, the American Pacific Fleet moved to Pearl Harbor, a move seen by Japan as a direct threat. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, master strategist, drew up a bold plan. Strike first, strike hard. Japan signed the Tripartite Pact with Hitler, linking its fate to Nazi Germany. The Pacific became a powder keg, and Japan prepared to light the fuse. By December 1941, tensions were at their breaking point. U.S. troops were scattered across the Pacific, vulnerable and far from home. The Japanese Empire, rising like a typhoon, aimed to crush American strength before it could retaliate. War was no longer a possibility, it was inevitable. December 7, 1941, a quiet Sunday shattered by fire and steel. At 6 a.m., 6 Japanese carriers launched 350 aircraft toward Hawaii. Dive bombers, torpedo planes, fighters, all with one target, the U.S. Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor. At 7:48 a.m., the first explosions ripped through Ford Island. Battleships erupted in flames. Tora, 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 the code for successful surprise. By the end of 2 attack waves, 5 American battleships were sunk, 3 crippled, 188 aircraft destroyed, over 2,400 servicemen dead. The Japanese lost only 29 planes. The attack plunged America into war. It was not just a military strike, it was a national trauma. President Roosevelt would later call it a date which will live in infamy. But Japan's victory was not complete. The American aircraft carriers were not in port. The tide of war was only beginning to rise. As smoke cleared from Pearl Harbor, America reeled. The Pacific Fleet was devastated, but not defeated. Crucially, the U.S. aircraft carriers Lexington and Enterprise had been away, spared from destruction. President Roosevelt addressed Congress the next day, declaring war. Across the nation, anger and resolve surged. Industry mobilized, and young men lined up to enlist. Yet the U.S. faced a daunting task. Thousands of kilometers of ocean, island by island, had to be retaken. Japan, now emboldened, seized Guam, Wake Island, and the Philippines. But America's strategy evolved. No longer would battleships dominate. Aircraft carriers became the new rulers of the sea. The war effort turned toward innovation, resilience, and striking back. A nation had been wounded, but not broken. The sleeping giant had awakened. After Pearl Harbor, Japan surged across the Pacific like a tidal wave. Hong Kong fell, then Thailand. Singapore, once deemed invincible, crumbled in weeks. The Philippines, too, succumbed. General MacArthur forced to flee, vowing, "I shall return." Japan seized oil-rich Indonesia, Dutch East Indies, and Borneo. The empire's reach expanded to its greatest size. Emperor Hirohito's forces seemed unstoppable, displacing colonial powers and bringing brutal rule. It was conquest at lightning speed, leaving shattered defenses and devastated populations in its wake. Japan aimed for total dominance, building the Greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere. But every empire reaches too far. In chasing supremacy, Japan awakened enemies across the world. And while Tokyo celebrated victory after victory, resistance was already building. In April 1942, America struck back. The plan was bold. Launch 16B, 25 bombers from the aircraft carrier home, something never done before. Their target, Tokyo itself, led by Lieutenant Colonel James Doolittle. These men knew they likely couldn't return. On April 18th, they roared off the deck in heavy seas. Hours later, explosions rocked Japan's capital. Though the material damage was minor, the psychological shock was immense. Japan had believed its home islands untouchable. The raid forced Japanese high command to pull back resources and reconsider their strategies. For the U.S., it was a needed morale boost, proving the enemy could be hit. Doolittle's raiders crash-landed in China, facing capture or death. But their mission had succeeded. They lit the spark of hope. It was a turning point in the shadows of defeat. Though battered, America was regrouping. In the Pacific, a new strategy emerged: island hopping. Instead of taking every enemy stronghold, the U.S. would leapfrog across key islands, cutting Japan's supply lines and weakening its perimeter. Battles raged at Guadalcanal, where Marines fought in Jumble Hell. Slowly, the tide turned. Aircraft carriers like the USS Yorktown and Enterprise became floating fortresses. Control of the skies decided control of the sea. The war transformed. Technology, logistics, and sheer willpower tipped the scales. Japan's losses mounted. As Americans pushed westward, the once invincible empire began to crack. Victory would not come quickly, but it was no longer impossible. Each island taken brought them closer to Tokyo. By 1945, the Pacific was a graveyard of steel and sacrifice. Iwo Jima, Okinawa, names etched in blood. Japanese resistance grew fiercer, even suicidal. Kamikaze pilots crashing into ships, civilians leaping from cliffs. The U.S. faced a terrifying choice: invade Japan or unleash a new weapon. On August 6th, Hiroshima vanished in a blinding flash. 3 days later, Nagasaki followed. The atomic bomb had ended the war, but at unimaginable cost. On August 15th, Emperor Hirohito announced surrender. The Pacific War, a clash of empires, had ended. Millions were dead, cities destroyed, but a new era began. America emerged as a superpower, and Japan, humbled, would rebuild from the ashes. The blood-soaked islands, once battlefields, would become memorials to courage and catastrophe. A bitter war for supremacy had changed the world forever. The legacy of the Pacific War lives on. Honor the fallen, remember the cost, and learn from history. Subscribe to Timeless Legend for more powerful stories that shape the world we live in.